Hello, this is Dr. Schimberger, and in this brief video talk, we're going to just talk about a number of different topics to help wrap up our focus on the legal affairs reporting beat. Let's talk about how we might report punishment in that regarding prisons and jails. The chief problem for us as journalists is the access. So when I was covering the courts, I would sometimes receive mail from inmates mailing to complain about maybe some of the conditions might have been going on, or maybe some of the difficulties that they're facing and they're not getting their needs met. So the only thing that you can really do is contact the jailer without really giving the inmate's name, because you don't want to create any problems for the inmates. They're looking to you to help, but you've got to kind of walk around it delicately. The warden or the jailer oversees the prison warden, and then the jail for the jailer. And a lot of times their records are denied to us on grounds of personal property. Personal privacy rather. So sometimes the only thing we can do is question, work with our editors and producers and directors to see how can we go about getting this information differently. Sometimes it could be talking to some of the jail employees, maybe off the record, if your news organization allows such a policy. So just know that there are some difficulties, and when we're trying to report on the punishments, or just reporting on things that are going on in the jails and the prisons, but it can be done. You just got to be patient and keep digging for information. Um, Sometimes the inmates, whether it be prisoners or just inmates at a county jail, they're going to describe to you some of the conditions that maybe they're not happy with. Um, and what you'll want to do too is, when you are doing the court beat, if you find any lawsuits, so again, when you're checking the civil division of circuit court, you'll look for any lawsuits that might have been filed by inmates. Many times inmates, they can file, and they can do it as a plaintiff, and when they do it on their own, they're doing it pro se. So again, another one of those Latin phrases, but it means that representation of oneself. So the plaintiff, which is the defendant in this case, or the inmate I should say now, but now that they're an inmate, they have the opportunity to do that. Many prisons and jails, they have law libraries, so they have access to information more than many people realize. But they do use that information to their advantage, and to a good advantage. They're trying to help themselves, as well as maybe the inmates that they happen to be there with. They're trying to be kind of an advocate, if you will. So whenever you see a lawsuit that has been filed by an inmate, you will want to contact people who might have known that person, so their family, maybe former employees, even the defense attorney. Sometimes, even though the inmates will file on their own behalf, pro se, sometimes they could have been in contact with a defense attorney. Some defense attorneys might work with inmates on an extremely low, um, uh, maybe even a zero fee. Sometimes it just depends on the case and it depends on the person. So they can do that through some sort of pro bono process, which is a small fee to nothing. So that is very possible. Let's look at probation for a few minutes. A lot of times, many cases will be probated. The defendants will serve a probated term. What does that mean? Well, first understand that probation is an alternative, and it's the preferred alternative to actually being in a jail or a prison, because this is still a level of freedom for the defendant. So judges often impose this the most, especially in misdemeanor cases, but it can happen in some of the smaller felonies. Many times they're done because the facilities are overcrowded, so probation occurs. Many times these are done too because defendants might have, again, just their backgrounds, their personal backgrounds are good. They haven't really had much trouble with the law. They just had some terrible circumstances to occur. So judges are usually more humane than we tend to give them credit for. But, so they'll go ahead and order that their sentence be probated. So that means, for instance, let's say that you were given a 1-year prison sentence. Well, a judge can, or excuse me, let me say a 12-month jail sentence. I should also have clarified in earlier videos that a jail is for those who serve up to 12 months. Prisons are for those who have been convicted of a crime and the sentences are more than 12 months. So usually maybe 1.5 or so years, then they're sent off to a penitentiary. But let's say that you are serving a 2-year prison sentence or getting ready to. The case has been decided and the judge has basically sentenced you to 2 years, but then probated that for 1 year. So that means in that 1 year time, you had better not occur or better not have any more charges to occur against you. You better stay clean. You need to avoid all kinds of that kind of activity, crime, whatever, because if something were to occur inside of that 1 year probationary period, then your 2-year prison sentence will become effective. So that's what probation means. It means that you have been given an extension of time to try to correct or just try to live life normally in the hopes that you don't run afoul of the law again. So that's what probation offers defendants. When someone's term has been probated, then probation officers are assigned. And many times their caseload is overridden as well. Supervision, it doesn't occur to the extent you would think. Many times defendants are just reporting to their probation officers just for a few minutes of questions and that's it. So the system is a little broken, but right now that's what is moving the cases through the system. A lot of research has been done as to, and a lot of stats are kept as to really what do probationers do they recommit crimes? Yes, it does occur. Many of them will commit new crimes, will be charged with the same charge but in a different case. There's sometimes a lot of things that will occur later. It does happen. Parole comes only after a portion of a prison sentence is served. So a defendant has to already be in prison for parole to be considered. Parole boards are political systems too, because the people who serve on parole boards are appointed by the governor, so they are political. Many times recidivism is high. Recidivism is the rate in which a new crime or new cases might pop up from that defendant. So when somebody is paroled, their transition to a normal life doesn't really occur effectively. They are not given much of a transition. This is where prisons are they're really needing some help with this. Programs are few and far between as to how to assist prisoners transition from prison life to normal civilization. Many don't know how, especially if they have been in prison for even a few years. To try to go back into society is difficult for them. So they have trouble getting jobs and thus don't have any money. And it just becomes more of a temptation than to commit new crimes. So the recidivism, we do see that as pretty high with those who have been paroled. Juvenile cases, I'm going to talk briefly because we are not given, as journalists, we're not given access to the juvenile courtroom. So it's very difficult. We can't even get the records of minors. They're all protected by law. So their cases are normally held sometimes in a separate facility, or in facilities, especially some of the new court facilities, there might be a space designated for juvenile, but the access is really tight. So you'll never see who goes in and who comes out unless you're stalking that door. And even then, you could be given a visit by one of the sheriff's deputies. But so they try to contain the privacy really, really tight. So minors who are defendants, they have no constitutional rights to bail, no constitutional rights to a jury trial or a public proceeding. So their cases are monitored differently from what defendants go through in the normal criminal trial process that we just talked about. In addition, the standard of proof is less rigid. So when a minor is charged with even if something as, I won't say a simple, but really even a small charge, maybe some sort of drug activity, then it's basically, yes, they have done it. So it's just a matter of now how can we rehabilitate that minor to where we can get them back on the right foot, so that way when they turn 18, they're not facing these problems anymore. Truancy cases are going to generally be heard also in juvenile courtrooms. Family courts also are known as domestic relations courts, and they handle all kinds of family type cases, child and spousal neglect, domestic violence, abuse, those types of things. The family courts are designed to follow a family for a certain period of time. Um, and family courts also receive little scrutiny from the media because they deal with personal matters. Um, so many times then there's really no need for us to be there, but maybe there could be a case that might involve maybe some high profile people, and even then you don't want to get into their messy situations, but it's not wise to really ignore family court. Try to be in tune with some of the issues that might go on, so that way you can help the public understand that the family courts are there, and these are the things that they might be trying to tackle. There are many other courts, and it depends on the state. It depends on just a number of things as to how they're set up. And a lot of these things that I'm going to mention, they're actually handled at district levels, but again, please understand that they can be separate courts in themselves. Like again, traffic court, it may be handled at the district level, but it's a separate court. Okay, there could be municipal courts as well. Tennessee has a system of those, where municipal courts handle local ordinance violations. Could be like parking. It could be a number of those types of things. Maybe dealing with high grass not being cut. Those types of things. Divorce courts, those are sometimes separate, and then probate courts. And then small claims. So many of those things we discussed when we talked about the district court level, especially with the civil cases. So many of those can be, especially with small claims and probate, those are handled at the district level court. But others, such as divorce, that's going to be handled in the civil division of circuit court. And then again, you might have some other separate courts along the way. Just wherever you go, you will want to know what's the architecture of the court system where you are covering. And then there are specialized federal courts. I've never covered any of these, but again, sometimes you might want to follow them just for the stats and for the trends. There's a U.S. tax court. We all know what they do, but I think what you should understand and just have this knowledge is that they don't do jury trials at all. So people who are tax attorneys, they don't have the practice of actually going through a trial process because there's no such thing in the tax court. It's just a matter of how can we settle tax disputes. Okay, that also deal with pension, IRA, gift, and excise taxes, all those good fun things. The judges are based in Washington, D.C. And then there are U.S. bankruptcy courts. These, anytime with bankruptcy, those kinds of cases are never filed in state courts. It's a federal issue. There are 94 bankruptcy courts, and they handle Chapter 7, Chapter 11, and Chapter 13 laws because those are the most prominent, most popular proceedings that are filed either by individuals or corporations. So these particular chapters deal with the tax code as far as really what can be allowed for bankruptcy. And they deal with everything from complete liquidation of debt, which is basically your Chapter 7, all the way up to Chapter 13, which is a restructuring of the debt. The only time you ever really need to be concerned about a bankruptcy court is if you know of a business that has declared bankruptcy, and so their case might be something you would want to follow. And then there are U.S. military courts. They're different from civilian courts. They have their own language. They have their own process, and it is different. It is not. It becomes apples and oranges night and day between the two. So, for instance, when we're talking about felonies and how they're being tried in the circuit court level, and so in the criminal division of circuit court, that's known as a general court martial. And your lesser offenses, so your misdemeanors, those are handled in a summary court martial process. Okay, so it's a little different. The judges there are officers who have seniority and rank over the defendants. So if a defendant happens to be a lieutenant, maybe some chance, then the officer has to be, or excuse me, the judge has to be an officer higher than the lieutenant. Um, then the prosecutors are known as Judge Advocate Generals. JAGs is what many people refer to them as with their acronym. Um, and they've gone through law school. So, I mean, they have a knowledge of the law, but they also have more of the knowledge of their own military law. Each service, now let's even break it down some more. Each branch of the military has its own system for handling appeals, how they might treat clemency, how they do parole. So it differs from one branch to another. I've only covered a general court martial at Fort Campbell once. It is interesting. And I will say that, I hate to try to bring any excitement on somebody else's demise, but really, if you are given the opportunity to cover these types of cases, just to have your knowledge expanded, you would really want to jump on that opportunity to cover a U.S. military court case if it ever happens for you. And then this is just a small list of issues that could be potential stories. Case bag logs. Um, those were really good to do. You want to keep the public informed as to how overwhelmed the judicial system is. Victims of crime, you could take that a number of ways. Are programs sufficient to handle them? What are the difficulties that they face? Why are they not reporting crimes? Okay. Prison rape. We still hear stories about that. What are the trends surrounding that? Suicides in jails or prisons. We also hear about those unfortunate circumstances. Rehabilitation. What are the systems doing to rehabilitate inmates? Or, okay, they're in there and we understand that they're in there as a punishment, but while they are there, how can we make effective use of their time? Are programs structured well enough to rehabilitate these citizens? We want them back in society as productive people. How do we help them do that? And then there's prison overcrowding. In fact, the coronavirus in Kentucky has, and not just Kentucky, but in other states, have looked to their prisons and how they can relieve some of, not necessarily overcrowding, but just how can we go ahead and try to get some of these inmates to prevent the coronavirus from spreading there. Who are the ones who are getting ready to be released? Who are some who are really no threat to society? They have very small charges. So, those cases have really popped up in the news quite a bit as well. There are plenty of other issues, and this beat will keep you busy if this is something that you might like to do. I enjoyed it for several years. There were times that I won't say I enjoyed, but I did appreciate the opportunity of being able to cover a murder trial. I learned something new all the time, not necessarily just about the court process, but I learned something new about humanity, about how humans are, and how, even though our judicial system might be the best that we have, the more you cover it, the more you realize it could be better. But how do we do that? Well, we have to keep pressing on those issues. That's your job as a journalist, is to be that watchdog and to be there to cover these things. Thank you for your attention on this fascinating world of legal affairs reporting.